And we are live. Welcome to another episode of the New York Information Security Meetup. And I have the great pleasure to introduce Steve Nicol, who is the SVP of Sales and Marketing at Cigent Technology Incorporated. How are you, Steve? Thanks for joining.
Oh, thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's, before we dive in, I would like to always establish some sort of clout to whoever I'm talking to. And, you know, you're no better than anybody else here. You have a lot of experience here that I would like to cover. If not possible, let's review some of your background, kind of where you started. You're a stranger to technology, and maybe we can kind of walk us through the some of the career path that you've encountered.
Oh, sure, David. Thanks for asking. Yeah, I after graduating from Princeton University, I worked at Hewlett-Packard for a number of years, Western Digital, and a couple other technology startups. And then in the mid-90s, I had the opportunity to start a company called Intellisync with my colleague, Brad Rowe. And we basically were in the business of synchronizing Palm Pilots and RIM Blackberries with Lotus Notes and Exchange and products like that. So we took that company public and sold it eventually to Nokia in 2004, and took a little vacation from working, but got back into the game about 5 years ago when I got involved with Cigent.
So tell me a bit about that journey. So you always were in technology, but you've seen things have changed. So that during that time off that you took, things have really progressed, right? I mean, you're talking about the technology of connecting Lotus Notes to Palm Pilots and Blackberries and so on. We are now in a very, very different age with very different attack vectors, for example, for cybersecurity and so on. What made you decide to move and join Cigent, and maybe tell me about kind of the circumstances around that?
Yeah, it's funny, from at a very high level, I'm always looking for this concept of a blue ocean versus a red ocean. The idea that if you're going to be involved with a startup, they've got to have a unique advantage. It can't be a Me Too product. And so when I was made aware of what the folks at Cigent were doing, who are co-founders of the company, I became very intrigued because they're taking a very unique approach to cybersecurity that I think is a perfect fit for the current threat environment.
So talk to me about kind of the red ocean versus blue ocean. What does that mean?
Well, it basically means that, if you're going to invest in a startup or be involved in a startup, it needs to be a defensible technology that's unique, can be patented, where you can be the leader in a very large space, right? You don't want to join a company where there are 20 companies chasing the same idea, all, fighting against each other for ownership of, some small slice of the pie. So what really intrigued me about Cigent is how unique it is, but also how big the potential total available market is for the solutions that we're working on.
And how did you know that? If you, a lot of people are looking for exactly that, right? So they move from startup to trying to, jump on kind of the fastest and best, train that's available out there, to grow personally and advance the career and so on. But a lot of times you don't know. There's a lot of Me Too's in the marketplace. How, did you evaluate? Because again, it's even on the surface, there's a lot of, similar type of marketing materials and so on. It's very, very difficult to know until post joining the firm. So how did you manage to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't know much about cybersecurity when I joined the team as a commercial officer. I really sort of relied on two data points. One is the heritage of the other founders of the company. They had done a lot of business with the intelligence agencies and had been asked by the intelligence agencies to prototype this solution. So I knew that they saw something in the platform that was unique, and it ended up that an organization called Incutel made an investment after the prototypes were delivered with the express idea of helping them to commercialize the technology. So that was one data point. The other data point is, as soon as I became aware of the company, we started talking to potential seed investors in Silicon Valley and some other areas, and we're able to get quite a bit of interest from some pretty seasoned technology execs at companies like Apple and Cisco and Mozilla and other companies that where these folks had done a lot of seed investments and really saw a unique opportunity to really sort of revolutionize the whole cybersecurity business.
So for you in particular, as you mentioned that you didn't have the background, how did you get yourself smart in the space? I mean, it's a lot of times the barriers to entry are kind of steep because there's just so much to learn in so little time, to use that cliche. How did you manage to do that?
Yeah, initially I really relied on, there's 5 founders of Cigent, by the way, and 3 of them are sort of what I would call the technology backers of the company, and have been doing consulting in this area for, more than 20 years. So I really relied on their expertise to sort of train me on what the key problems are in protecting data and their unique approach to it. And also, we went out and just talked to a number of customers. We went out and talked to all the large storage manufacturers, companies like Western Digital and Seagate, and all the storage controller manufacturers worldwide. We went and talked to a lot of the EDR and antivirus vendors to really get a good idea of what they can do and what their limitations are. So after about the first 6 months, we had a pretty good idea of what we needed to do to deliver something that could be disruptive to the endpoint data security marketplace.
So when you're developing a product, there are a lot of challenges involved, right? So, market visibility is one, and it's funny because when you go out and present, a lot of people will tell you, "Oh, this is great, we love it," and you're smiling, and because you know where I'm going with this. But when it comes down to pay, they're like, "Oh, well, this was great, but we don't have the budget for it." And then also things that this is such a moving target in the sense that you're trying to develop something that within 12 months may become obsolete or a feature of another product. Is it a feature or a platform? Is it something that people are really going to need? And also, especially if you're dealing with enterprise, it's got to fall into within a category. And you're smiling because it's true. It has to be feeling, because otherwise, if it's not projected, if it's not like financed and approved and then it's scheduled, you're nowhere. So tell me about kind of the all those trials and tribulations that the company went through when you guys built the product.
Yeah, that's a good point. When we first went out and started talking to the big players in storage and the PC OEMs, we got a lot of sort of, "Oh, this is really interesting, but it's the market's too green, or you're not quite ready yet." And we were asking some of these potential partners to embed firmware in their solutions. So that's no small ask, right? Because that takes them quite a while to actually engineer and test and deliver. So we had to find a partner to actually integrate our solution into the storage layer of SSD controllers and build drives for us that would allow us to go to market. So it was very frustrating at first to get folks to see the vision, understand the value proposition, and then agree that there was a go-to-market plan that was feasible. But I sit here 4 years later, and I'm very pleased on what we've accomplished so far. I'm pretty confident that we're going to be able to pull this off. But it was a lot of sort of at first very frustrating to figure out what the right path was to get to market. Definitely.
And then you have to like skate to where the puck is, not
correct.
Where like Wayne Gretzky's saying. And it's very true with technology, as you mentioned. Even for storage, there are just so many trends. I mean, things are, cloudified, if that's even a word. I remember like spending so much money on SSDs, and now I don't have it anymore. It's all stored somewhere, and then also the price point came down. So the things are moving at like speed of light. And so how do you take all of that into consideration? And then when you finally had a product how did you find that the first handful of customers willing to, stick their neck out and help you guys out from from a just a testing perspective and usability?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll start with the second question first. Fortunately, because of our involvement with the intelligence agencies, they actually placed an order before we built the product, and the funding that came from Intel was used to actually commercialize the technology and ship a product to the government agencies that see value in our platform. So usually companies start at commercial and they try to move into the federal or the DoD space. We actually started and took an opposite approach. We said, let's build something for the intelligence agencies that, will repel nation state attacks, and let's get that right first, and then we'll figure out how to commercialize this for the broader market. So that's how we sort of approached delivering this to customers. I'm sorry, I forget the first part of your question, but I know it was a good one.
Yeah, no, just in terms of be able to develop the product, in time of like that change that, because you're trying to move to, the company towards a, where the technology is going to be.
Yeah.
And they're like, there's such a fast paced changes in storage and so on and everything else. And
yeah.
And so how do you develop, because by the time it takes you, I don't know how long it took you before we went to GA, but it takes a while. So you're at risk of like starting development. And by the time you're already, have something to go to market, it's already, obsolete because things are moving so fast. So do you recall what that process looked like?
Yeah, in fact, early on in our evolution, there were people within the company advocated that we actually build our own drives, right? Actually do our own ASICs and build our own SSDs. We decided
and I think that was a smart choice. Building hardware is a whole ball of wax. It's like
that is a bad strategy, and I believe me, having been in the software business most of my life, I know that don't want to be in the hardware business. We've had to raise a lot more money than we raised, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm laughing, but it is. It's there's a reason why there's a handful of manufacturers out there. It's like and millions of software companies. Well,
yeah, now you're basically down to 3 SSD manufacturers that control the entire worldwide supply of NAND. So bad strategy to be in the hardware business. So what we decided to do, David, is to come up with really a platform that we could license to storage manufacturers who could embed our firmware into their platforms and complement that with software that would enable those security features, but also allow customers to manage them either directly on the endpoint or centrally through the cloud, through an enterprise management console. So our real business plan is to basically give our firmware away to any storage partner that is interested in delivering this feature set, let them integrate it into their storage devices, and then we allow the features to be turned on using our software in our management console, essentially. So we can keep up with the changes in storage technology and other technologies, over time. We're just focused on the firmware and the software that makes it all happen.
Yeah, and Steve, we are going to dive into the details of what exactly it is that Cigent does, and the details and kind of the devil's in the details.
Yeah.
But before we jump into that, let me ask you a couple of tough questions. Are you ready?
I'm sure am. Yeah.
So there's a reason why a lot of companies start with commercial and then they move to federal, because working with a federal is hard. It's a long timelines. You got to deal with a lot of bureaucracy, red tape, you name it. But it's a very unique approach to start, the opposite way.
Yeah.
Why? Like, just kind of out of curiosity, why was the case?
Well, so if you look at the space we're in, right, we're in endpoint data security.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of commercial customers have moved everything to the cloud, right? So they're, if I talk to a large enterprise, they'll say, well, we don't really care what's happening on the endpoint. We've moved all our data to the cloud. We use virtual environments, and our cloud provider is going to take good care of us. Now, I would dispute that, but that's kind of the attitude of the large commercial enterprise customers. Government customers are completely different, right? They have employees who have very sensitive information on their laptops, whether it be in Windows or Linux or MacBooks or you name it. They've got, you've got intelligence agents, employees of intelligence agencies going over borders. They're traveling, they're leaving their devices in hotel rooms. If somebody gets physical access to the laptop of an intelligence agent, lives are at stake. So one of the reasons we started with the federal and the DoD type customers is that they're the ones that are value endpoint security the most, essentially, and can appreciate some of the extra security that we offer for their employees, basically.
Yeah, makes total sense, and thank you for that. You answered quite well, and just for the folks watching, it's completely unscripted. So if I tackle Steve with some hard questions, he's doing a great job. So tell me, let's dive into exactly what you mentioned, the endpoint security piece. What exactly Cigent do, and then maybe like the top 1 or 2 use cases that are currently like kind of the best the best fit for the company and its products.
Yeah, let's talk about the use cases first. So in endpoint security, we've identified 3 broad use cases for situations where data becomes vulnerable. The first is physical security. It's what I talked about before. Somebody steals my laptop, gets physical access to my device. Maybe I'm going through customs and somebody clones my PC, or somebody live boots into Linux.
And Steve, you go through a mile a minute, but these are real. No, these are real use cases. What you just described happens all the time. In fact, there's a lot of companies that give their employees burner phones and burner laptops and tablets before they go overseas to certain countries. Is that correct?
It's funny. I was talking to one of the largest SSD manufacturers in the world, and they are not allowed to bring a PC into mainland China. They are not allowed to go over the border with an SSD installed in their laptop. They have to use some sort of thin client device for that very reason.
And isn't it amazing, Steve? When you talk to executives, are they aware? Is it something or just the CISOs coming back and say, okay, the executives, they have a policy in the company saying, if you're going to these countries, you're not taking your laptop, you're not taking your phone, we're giving your devices, and then they're going to have the minimal, user applications on there, but you're not taking. Is this something that's widely known, or it's just between us here, practitioners?
Well, that's a very good question, and a little source of frustration that we have. It's definitely widely known in the federal government, right? You see the Biden administration putting directives out that you need to support, encryption and multi-factor authentication. That's exactly what they're talking about, right? Make it difficult for cyber adversaries to get at sensitive data. Some of the larger enterprise customers have put secure travel initiatives in place, so they're buying these types of endpoint data solutions for their executives, particularly traveling executives, because honestly, the biggest fear they have is that somebody's on a business trip and they leave their laptop in an Uber, right? So, and there's some really sensitive information.
And never happens ever.
Right.
I mean, like 1 in a billion, right? The probability of you having 1 or 2 many drinks and leaving it behind on vacation somewhere are slim to none.
Gee,
right?
What are the odds of that, right? But yeah, so that's the physical case, right? Then you have the even trickier case, which is, with all these advanced cyber attacks that we're all facing today, you've got supply chain attacks like the SolarWinds attack, you've got zero-day attacks, you've got social engineering attacks, insider threats. It goes on and on, right? The idea that you can sort of repel all of these types of threats with a prevention-only approach is probably a fantasy. So you've got to assume that at some point somebody's going to, have a successful intrusion into your IT infrastructure, be able to access credentials, and log in as you, essentially. So when you're online, when you log into your PC, you can never assume that you're the only person that's looking at your data. You've got to assume that there is some threat dwelling in your network or in your infrastructure that is waiting for the right time to either exfiltrate your data or ransom it, or both. And that's a use case that has not been addressed in the area of endpoint security that we're highly focused on, and I think we've come up with a really compelling solution for that.
So you're assuming you're compromised,
Correct.
basically,
Yeah.
at any given point. So tell me about that's amazing. I mean, that is, you know, you're talking about zero trust, but not a lot of people are talking about zero trust essentially
Yeah.
for your endpoint device, because that's essentially what this is, right?
It's zero trust actually at the file level. So not only for your
Correct.
device, but at the files that you want to protect. What we
Thank
do.
you, Steve. I stand corrected. I appreciate it. So talk to me a bit, you know, so let's dive into the details and just unravel this. You know, how do you guys manage to do this?
Yeah, what we do, we do two things. The first thing we do is, if we can, we hook an area of the storage device called TCG Opal, which is a very technical term, but it basically means that the device is a self-encrypting drive. And several of the laptops, like Lenovo ships almost every business PC with self-encrypting drives. Unfortunately, nobody uses it because nobody has come up with a compelling application for this technology. So
is that the one you turn on in the BIOS? Sometimes they have like the setup, you have to log into the BIOS and set it up manually. Is that it?
Yeah, typically these self-encrypting drives are very difficult to configure. And that's one of the problems we've solved, actually. With our software, we let you create these little hardware encrypted partitions. We call them secure drives. And once you set them up, you can hide sensitive data and keep them hidden below the OS layer, even when you're logged into your PC. So if a threat actor gets on your network or on your system, steals your credentials, they're not going to be able to see that you've got these little drives hidden away. So if I could give you an analogy, if somebody broke into your home and bypassed your security, you wouldn't want to leave your safe hidden out in plain view. You'd want to keep it invisible, right? Hidden away. And that's what we're doing at that layer. Now, at some point, you've got to mount these drives, these secure drives, and start exposing your files to the Windows file system, right? So, once you have access to your secure files and your applications have access to secure files, what we do is we wrap these files in a layer of multi-factor authentication. So in order for me to access a file that I've designated in this fashion, I've got to prove my identity with a second factor of authentication. So a Windows Hello fingerprint, facial recognition. We support Cisco Duo. For the military, we support CAT cards and PIV cards and other authentication techniques. So the idea is that even if ransomware or malware or some insider gets access to your PC, when they go to grab the data, they're not going to be able to access it because they can't prove to the system that they're Steve Nicol, essentially.
That's amazing. And what's the let's touch a bit about the kind of the user experience, which is, mostly paramount when we're talking about endpoint.
Yeah.
If the end user experience is compromised, then people will circumvent throughout the normal use, and then it's the solution's out the window. Let's talk a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a common question we get from customers and potential customers. And to sort of come up with a realistic use case, we've created two modes for this. One is the zero trust mode, where you can configure files by file type or by folder type, or by disk partition that I talked about before, as always protected, right? In other words, it's a complete zero trust approach. The only way you can access a file is by serving up your second factor of authentication. Obviously, that only really is effective for really sensitive information that you want to protect at all costs. This would be the cash you're putting in your safe, right? You're not going to leave your cash sitting around for a threat actor to grab without some deterrence, right? But there's a second mode that we support, and we call it the risk-based authentication mode. So you can say, well, in the case of an elevated threat environment, or if the security software that Cigent has integrated with, such as your EDR or your antivirus, detects a potential threat, let's lock down those potentially vulnerable files until the threat is cleared, and then we'll unlock them. So when that type of risk-based authentication is triggered, all the user really has to do is just authenticate to access the file. They're not really inconvenienced. They're just asked to prove that their identity before they're given rights to unlock the file. Similarly, if you have a SOC, let's say you've got an internal security operations center, and they're dealing with a security incident, they can lock down all of those risk-based files until the incident is cleared. So we give you kind of options on how these files are designated and when all these protections are triggered in order to meet the different security needs of the data, basically.
Interesting. And again, I did not receive these questions up front, so Steve is doing a great job here. And I'll try to be the kind of the buyer advocate here. So let me ask you a couple more questions. So what about in terms of performance? Does the solution inhibits performance in terms of degradation in terms of the file transfer on the laptop or desktop or whatnot?
No, I mean the disk partitions that I mentioned earlier that's the advantage of using TCG Opal. It's hardware encryption. It happens almost instantaneously. So let's say you had an open disk partition. You're accessing your files, and your SOC determines there's a potential ransomware attack going on. They could lock from a central location your disk partitions. They'll immediately encrypt on the fly and disappear from the Windows file system or the Linux file system. Similarly, we use a signed Windows Mini filter driver to lock access to files with multi-factor authentication, and that has almost zero overhead on the file system. So it's a very sort of low impact way to keep your data secure, essentially.
And Steve, does it come with a panic button where I can press on press on the button and then poof, all my sensitive information is encrypted? Something I had to, connect up from the outside in.
No, that's a good idea for a feature, though. There have been suggestions that we do that, and we do kind of have a panic button. Our solution has an optional management console, so you can press a panic button that will lock down a group of users centrally, but we don't have one that runs locally on the endpoint PC.
Do you remember when we used to work in offices, there was this app or window thing where, if your boss comes over from behind you, you can press on it and all of a sudden it loads this, Excel spreadsheet.
Yes.
Then you can hide all your activities. Maybe something like that, but more on the security side. But you brought up a great point. So when you deployed a solution for, several laptops, it's a no-brainer, right? But then when you start to look at enterprise and when everything is remote and have to be deployed remote, and then they have to retrieve the keys and people forget the password, yada, yada. I mean, there's just a slew of issues that come with enterprise software. Do you take care of all of that?
We do. Yeah, that's a common problem, right? For deploying these types of solutions. The biggest the biggest sort of liability is, just like you mentioned, lost keys or forgotten keys. So we give.
And that never happens, of course. It
happens all the time. Yeah.
It's like leaving your laptop in an Uber. Never happens. You never lose your keys.
Exactly. First of all, we do a real good job when we create the key. So one of the problems with encryption technology, usually, for full disk encryption, which is encryption of data at rest, is the vendors do a pretty poor job of hiding the keys, whether it's Microsoft with BitLocker or some of the storage players that use hardware encryption. You'd be surprised how at risk the key material is, and easy it is to get access to it. But so when we create the key, we really do a good job of creating a very difficult key that is scrambled, encrypted, stored in multiple locations, and even sprinkled through the firmware so that it's very difficult to find the keys, if not impossible. And we've had very experienced companies try to reverse engineer our key management, and they can't. But to your question, one of the options we give users is to allow for secure recovery of key material, and we do that through the management console that we offer as well.
What if that person is not present, or you have to have access to files that to recover them without that person consent? Is that something you can do?
You can. Yeah, that's one of the configuration options. You can also revoke somebody's rights to files as well. So if let's say you have an employee that leaves the company, but you haven't got their laptop back, you can lock down their access to certain files centrally and revoke their rights to access that data as an option as well.
So it comes with a little optional, smoke capsule where this
Yes.
this will self-destruct like impossible mission, or is that it's all optional? It's in the next release, like a feature that might be created for the highly sensitive information.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it's so good.
no, I was going to say, yeah, like brick the device or blow up the device if you're no longer a part of the inside.
Or just like I said, just blow a little bit of smoke so it looks like you bricked the device. So it's like security through obscurity. So from a deployment perspective, I guess executives are not totally like always savvy about and I'm talking about kind of the use case of like having this for for some very sensitive endpoints. What that looks like from an actual deployment perspective. Did they just wake up one day and it's installed? Through a Windows, I'm assuming some sort of window push, or what's the process like?
Yeah, we push out the app, the Windows app to the executive. They install it. They set up their preferred method of multi-factor authentication because everybody's different, right? Some people like to use a fingerprint, others like to use a custom PIN or facial recognition or what have you. But what we do that's the hard part is configuring the protections for the files, right? So we allow you to centrally decide what types of files are protected, what those rules are. Are they always protected? Sometimes protected in a higher risk environment. We also let you set up and configure folders. So you could say, let's say you're a defense contractor and your job is to protect CUI, which is a common request or requirement in CMMC these days. You could set up a CUI folder and just instruct your employees to always store their sensitive files in the CUI.
What's the CUI? Like, it's abbreviation for what again? Just
it's controlled unclassified information. So anybody doing business with the DoD, whether it be a government agency or a defense industry contractor, is required to protect CUI at all times as part of the CMMC 2.0 requirements recently issued by the Biden administration.
Yep.
But it's not just CMMC. It can be HIPAA. It can be GDPR. Anything where you have sensitive data and you want to protect it and have control over those protections. Your employees just basically have to know where to store that type of data when it's on.
And who doesn't? That's the thing, Steve. Like, who does not have sensitive information? I mean, almost any type of loss would have some risk associated with it. We are a knowledge-based economy. Everybody has something on their laptops, whether it's an inbox, whether it's files, whether it's report. I mean, everyone's got a sensitive information on there.
And that's my beef with the commercial customers, because we hear this, oh, well, we've moved everything to the cloud argument. But my sort of argument is, well, first of all, you move it to the cloud, you're allowing them to protect your data. You're not just in control of your encryption keys, you're giving that up. But when the data moves back and forth, it's also put at risk, right? Think of something like Dropbox. Dropbox, I'm not picking on Dropbox, great product. It's encrypted when it's in the cloud. But when you synchronize to a local folder, those files are not encrypted. And if somebody steals your credentials and logs on as you into your Dropbox account, they can access the files that are in the cloud as well. So people always have sensitive data on the local PC. And anybody that claims that they don't, I think, is in a little bit of denial.
Yeah, and I concur. I mean, it's we always store things locally just for convenience. We like it. I mean, we're like hoarders a little bit, right? Everybody wants their stuff on their lap, because they go out flying, they go somewhere, they're unsure of the connectivity, they just wanted to save it for later. I mean, a cloud is one. We actually see cloud more of a backup, and the local for real work, and then we sync it to the cloud once we're done with it. That's the workflow, not the other way around.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's a third use case we haven't talked about, which is, okay, let's say you've got a file. It's a really sensitive file. You want to protect it, but you want to share it securely, or you want to move it to the cloud, or you want to move it to a collaboration platform like OneDrive or Dropbox. We allow you to go in to and designate the file as what we call an anywhere file, which means that you encrypt the file and you protect it with MFA, and you add user rights to the file so that only those designated users can have access to that file no matter what location it's stored in when it leaves the endpoint. And the only way they can access that file is with that second factor of authentication.
So
that's a really typical use case.
Yeah, it's almost like a DRM, right? It's it was very expensive and very difficult to deploy. Adobe come to mind, not to bash Adobe, but this it was a great idea at the time, but very few companies, organizations actually deployed it.
Yeah, I think one of the problems with DRM is you have to remember all the passwords, right? And so we've taken that sort of inconvenience away from the end user. All they have to know is how to authenticate when they access a file, and that basically becomes their private key to access information that they're entitled to. So this is not a full DRM solution. We kind of stop at secure delivery of the file. If it gets to somebody's laptop and they decrypt the file and do something malicious with it, that's kind of where we draw the line. But we're trying to keep those files protected when they're in the cloud, stored externally, attached to an email, or just shared internally between trusted users, basically.
Do you have a situation where you need like two people to authenticate to decrypt the file? Like when they turn on the switch for nuclear launch, you have a couple of people turning the key. Is that also something that you've allowed to do virtually on some of these files, or not yet?
No, but we'll be filing a patent on that tomorrow, David, based on your idea. No, no, that's a great idea, though. There are sort of other authentication, like one of the things that customers sort of in the, security space have asked for, or the intelligence space have asked for, is geolocation-based authentication. So think about having access to your files when you're at the Pentagon, but not being able to access files once the laptop leaves the Pentagon. No one at the Pentagon has asked us for this. I'm just giving you a theoretical example of how you can merge sort of multi-factor authentication with geolocation information, or relying on your smartphone basically to determine when and if you can access certain files. A lot of interesting things that you can do with this technology that we haven't done yet that we're looking at.
Well, possibilities are endless, and you've heard us here first, just FYI. So who tried to break this? I'm sure you kind of touched upon it like briefly when you mentioned that some people were like, you had, I'm sure, companies, third parties trying to break it, trying to figure out, reverse engineer it and figure out where the keys are and so on. Tell me about that process. How did you, because do you provide guarantees? I have a bunch of questions related to kind of the security of this type of solution.
Yeah, no, great question, David. So 3 of our 5 founders worked at a company called CPR Tools, which I mentioned earlier they're basically one of the premier data storage experts in the area of data forensics, encryption, storage security. And they're sent drives from a lot of law enforcement agencies and asked to decrypt those drives, based on a number of different circumstances. They're even sent drives that have been shredded or have bullet holes in them, or somebody's taken a hammer to the storage device.
Steve, I was about to ask you if you know any cool stories, and you were just like ahead of me, like one step.
Oh yeah, I mean, in their lab, they have this shredded hard drive that they were able to recover like 90% of the encrypted data from, which was just amazing to me. I don't know exactly how they did it, but they did some sort of firmware injection technique where they went in and found the keys and then used X-ray technology to get at the data.
Isn't it amazing? Because you think about like, how the hell do you shred a hard drive to begin with? This is something you don't just shred. It's not like I have like, I have at home, I have like 8-sheet, shredder. Yeah. That cannot, and I can barely even shred a credit card, let alone a hard drive. So, the people that are shredding hard drives and you're smiling are serious about security. So how do you even go there? And I don't even know what a shredded hard drives look like. So the whole story sounds, fascinating to me.
I think I was told they put it through some sort of farm equipment. Trying to protect the authorities from getting access to.
So it wasn't a purpose-built hard drive shredder. So maybe that's why they were able to recover it.
I think that's true. But basically, these guys can decrypt anything, right? So they know all the tricks, and they've been given our SSDs with that invisibility that I mentioned before, and been told to reverse engineer it, and they cannot. They've tried everything, and it all comes down to how much effort you put into protecting that key material. And it's all about, can they reverse engineer the keys and recover the keys? And so far, so good. We've also had our software tested by MITRE. We have a partnership with the U.S. Air Force where they're funding some of our development and planning to use our solutions in a number of different use cases. And they asked the MITRE Corporation, which is a nonprofit testing lab really for cybersecurity, to put the product through its paces. And they found some vulnerabilities that we were able to fix, but we got pretty glowing report card from the MITRE Corporation as well. So
these sometimes get questions around securing like crypto wallets, software crypto wallets, because that sounds almost like a natural solution for that. If you have one on your laptop and you want to secure it from the outside world, that would be almost ideal. Do you ever get that use case?
It's funny, I am looking for people that are interested in that use case right now. If you think about that, those secure disk partitions that we offer, those are cold storage wallets for digital assets, right? You put cryptocurrency tokens, NFTs, that's where you want to store that information, because it's impossible to get at. It's protected with multi-factor authentication. Even when those secure drives are mounted, those individual files are protected with our multi-factor authentication. So very difficult to exfiltrate or steal that. So yeah, I'm very interested in moving beyond just protecting secure files, but into securing digital assets and finding partners in that area.
Well, again, these questions were not scripted, so just I'm just brainstorming here.
It's a great question. Yeah.
So listen, how do you get started? What does it look like? And I'll ask you kind of the wrap up question, like how is best to reach you? Can you try it? If I don't like it and it feels like it's just destroying my mojo, can I take it off? All those questions that we can ask right now.
Yeah, you can go to our website and download a 30-day subscription to our what we call Cigent Plus. By the way, we're launching a brand new version of our website this week, so let the smoke clear. But give it a week or so. But yeah, go to our website, subscribe to Cigent Plus, install it on any system that supports any self-encrypting drive, and play with that invisibility and those zero trust file access controls that I mentioned. It needs to be a Windows system. If you're interested in testing our SSD technology, reach out to me and we'll see about getting you an evaluation unit. We're happy to do that, for legitimate opportunities as well. We support both internal SSDs and external SSDs that connect via USB ports, so it's pretty easy to try it out before you go through the inconvenience of swapping your drives out if that's indeed what you want to do. And you can also buy PCs with our solutions pre-installed. Dell resells our solutions, and you can pretty much buy any laptop pre-configured with a Cigent internal SSD from an authorized reseller as well.
Fantastic, Steve. It sounds like installing your software will make leaving your laptops and Uber a pleasure, and not a nightmare.
That's our goal. Yeah.
We can trademark that one. Thank you very much, Steve, for taking the time to chat today. Thanks for joining. Looking forward to seeing you in the next event. And until then, stay safe all. Thank you, Steve.
Okay, David, stay safe as well. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.